My stepmom told everyone at my graduation that my real mom would be ashamed of me, so I played the recording back at her birthday party. I was 8 when Mom died in a car accident. Dad fell apart completely. Couldn't even make me breakfast without burning it. For 2 years, it was just us stumbling through life, eating cereal for dinner, and forgetting to do laundry until I had no clean clothes left. Then, he met Ashley at his grief support group. She seemed like a miracle. She cooked actual meals, helped with my homework, and slowly brought laughter back into our house. When they married, she insisted I call her mom. "Your real mother would want you to have a mother figure," she said, stroking my hair. "I promised to love you like my own." I believed her completely. For 3 years, Ashley played the perfect stepmother. She attended every school event, bought me clothes that actually fit, and even helped me with my science fair project that won first place. Dad would beam watching us together. "See how natural this is," he'd say. "We're a real family again." But I started noticing things. How her smile would disappear the moment Dad left the room. How she'd make subtle comments about my genetic limitations inherited from Mom's side. How she'd compare everything I did to what her sister's daughter accomplished. The mask began slipping during my junior year. "Your mother was always scattered," she'd say while I struggled with algebra. "I see that same lack of focus in you." When I got into University of California, Berkeley with a partial scholarship, she barely acknowledged it. "Pasadena City College might be more realistic," she suggested to Dad. "We don't want to set her up for failure." I started keeping my achievements to myself. Senior year, things escalated. She'd criticize my college essays, suggesting my writing was emotionally immature. She questioned whether I was college material in front of relatives. Most painfully, she began rewriting the story of my mother. "If she'd been more responsible, maybe that accident wouldn't have happened," she said during one particularly cruel dinner. I stopped eating with them. The cruelty became systematic. Ashley would intercept college acceptance letters before Dad saw them, then tell him I'd been rejected from schools that had actually offered me scholarships. She convinced our relatives that I was struggling academically when I was actually on the honor roll. She started suggesting to Dad's friends that I might have inherited my grandmother's mental health issues. I didn't even know my grandmother had mental health problems until I overheard Ashley on the phone with her sister. "The instability definitely runs in that family," she said, not knowing I was listening. First, the grandmother with her episodes, then Laura with her paranoid delusions before the accident, and now this one showing signs, too. That was the first time I'd heard anyone suggest Mom had been paranoid or delusional. But Ashley said it with such conviction that I started questioning my own memories. Had Mom really been acting strange before she died? I'd been so young. Maybe I'd missed the signs. Maybe Ashley was right about our family's mental health issues. Maybe I was losing my grip on reality. The gaslighting was so subtle and persistent that I began doubting everything. When I mentioned feeling confused about Mom's last few months, Ashley would nod sympathetically. "Your mother was going through a very difficult time," she'd say gently. "She was becoming increasingly paranoid, seeing threats that weren't there. It's probably better that you don't remember all of it." But there were moments when fragments of real memories would surface. Mom staying up late on her computer, making mysterious phone calls, asking strange questions about Ashley's background. At the time, I'd assumed she was just being protective of Dad's new relationship. Now, I wondered if there had been more to it. The breaking point came at graduation. I'd worked 4 years for this moment. Valedictorian, full ride to University of California, Berkeley, early admission to their honors program. As I walked across the stage, I spotted Dad and Ashley in the crowd. He was beaming with pride. She looked bored, checking her phone. At the reception afterward, parents surrounded me with congratulations. Ms. Davis, my English teacher, gushed about my scholarship essay. "Your mother raised you right," she said warmly. "Laura would be so proud." That's when Ashley's mask finally slipped completely. Her face darkened with genuine hatred. For just a moment, I saw the real person underneath the stepmother act. Actually, she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Her real mother would be ashamed of the selfish, ungrateful person she's become. Thank goodness she has me to provide actual guidance. The crowd went silent. I felt my face burn with humiliation as whispers started. Dad stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. Ms. Davis looked appalled. "That seems unnecessarily harsh for a graduation celebration. Someone needs to keep her grounded." Ashley continued, her voice getting louder and more venomous. "Her mother spoiled her, filled her head with unrealistic dreams. If she'd lived, she'd see the same character flaws I deal with daily. The entitlement, the manipulation, the constant need for attention. My best friend, Chloe, stepped forward. That's completely inappropriate. Ashley turned on her, too. Oh, please. You've enabled her delusions for years. Someone needs to tell the truth about what this family has been through. The entire reception was staring now. Dad looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Ashley, he said quietly. Maybe we should. No, she cut him off. I've been patient for 7 years trying to help her overcome her genetic predisposition toward instability. But look at her. Dramatic, attention-seeking, just like her mother was at the end. That's when I snapped. At the end? I asked, my voice shaking. What do you mean at the end? Ashley realized she'd said too much. Her face went pale. I mean before the accident. Your mother was becoming increasingly unstable. You barely knew her before the accident, I pointed out. You met Dad at grief counseling after she died. The lie hung in the air between us. Several people were paying close attention now, including Uncle Frank, who'd known our family for years. Actually, Uncle Frank said slowly, I could have sworn David mentioned meeting you before Laura's accident. Dad looked confused. No, that's not. We met at the support group, but Ashley's face had gone completely white. She was trapped, and she knew it. I excused myself and spent the rest of the reception in the bathroom crying. But something had shifted. For the first time, other people had witnessed Ashley's cruelty. The perfect stepmother mask had cracked in public. That night, I lay in bed replaying not just her words, but Uncle Frank's observation. Had Ashley and Dad met before Mom's death? Why would she lie about something like that? Something Dad had mentioned years ago suddenly clicked. After Mom's funeral, he'd kept everything in storage, including Mom's old recording equipment from her podcast days. Mom had been working on a true crime series before she died, investigating local cold cases. Maybe her equipment would have other recordings. Maybe there were clues about what had been bothering her in those final months. The next morning, while Dad and Ashley went to brunch with her sister, I drove to the storage unit. The place smelled like dust and old cardboard. Dad had rented the largest unit available, unable to bear throwing away Mom's things. Her podcast equipment was exactly where he'd said it would be, in boxes labeled Laura's work stuff. But what I found underneath changed everything. Hidden beneath cables and microphones was a small digital recorder I'd never seen before. It was still functional with dozens of files labeled with dates from Mom's final months. I listened to the first file and nearly dropped the device. It was Ashley's voice, but not talking to Mom or Dad. She was on the phone with someone discussing our family in cold, calculating terms. The insurance payout alone is worth $2 million, she said, plus the house equity and his business assets. David's completely broken, desperate for someone to fix his life. He'll never question anything I tell him. My hands shook as I realized Mom had been recording Ashley without her knowledge. The next file was even more damning. Ashley was explaining to someone called Marcus how she'd targeted Dad specifically after researching our family's finances online. I've done this before, she said casually. Rich widowers are easy targets. They're lonely, grateful for attention, and they don't ask difficult questions if you give them what they need emotionally. I sat on the storage unit floor going through file after file. Mom had been building a case documenting evidence of what was clearly a deliberate con job, but it got worse. So much worse. In the later recordings, Ashley wasn't just discussing financial manipulation. She was talking about eliminating obstacles. She's getting suspicious, Ashley told Marcus in one recording. Laura's been asking questions about my background, looking into my previous relationships. She even hired some kind of investigator. What are you going to do? Same thing I did with Edward's ex-wife when she got too curious. Make it look accidental. My blood ran cold. Edward must have been another victim. The conversation that followed was the most chilling thing I'd ever heard. Ashley and Marcus discussed sabotaging Mom's car, loosening the brake lines just enough to cause an accident during her daily commute on the winding mountain road. She drives that route every Tuesday. Ashley's voice said clearly. Same time, same speed. If the brakes fail at Eagle Pass Bend, it'll look completely accidental. Mountains are dangerous. Everyone knows that. Marcus's response made me sick. You sure about the timing? Positive. I've been tracking her routine for months. The insurance money alone is worth $2 million plus the house equity. David's so grateful for my support during this difficult time. He'll never question anything. I'll be the grieving stepmother helping him heal. They were planning my mother's murder and talking about it like they were discussing dinner plans. I kept listening, horrified but unable to stop. The recordings revealed that Ashley had done this before multiple times. There was Arthur in Scottsdale, Arizona, whose heart attack seemed convenient considering his new will. Edward in Boulder, Colorado, who'd fallen down his basement stairs after changing his life insurance beneficiary. Thomas in Portland, Oregon, whose prescription medication mysteriously interacted fatally with alcohol he supposedly never drank. Each death had netted Ashley hundreds of thousands of dollars. She was a serial killer who specialized in wealthy men with assets to inherit. But Mom had figured it out. The next recording was Mom confronting Ashley directly. They'd met at the Daily Grind Cafe, and Mom had worn a wire. "I know what you are," Mom's voice said, steady, despite her obvious terror. Ashley laughed, a cold, emotionless sound I'd never heard from her before. "You know nothing. David's already pulling away from you. He tells me everything. How distant you've become. How paranoid he's worried about your mental health because you've been poisoning him against me. I've been helping him see reality. You're unstable just like your mother was before she had a breakdown. It runs in families, doesn't it? Mental illness, paranoia, delusions of persecution. I'd never known my grandmother had any mental health issues. But now I understood how Ashley had been laying groundwork to discredit Mom just like she'd been doing to me. David will never believe you," Ashley continued confidently, "especially after your accident. Such a tragedy when someone with psychological problems loses control of their vehicle on those dangerous mountain curves. People will investigate." "No, they won't. Grief makes people accept simple explanations. Your husband will be devastated. Your daughter will need a stable mother figure. And I'll be there to pick up the pieces just like I always am." The recording ended with Mom promising to expose everything. 3 days later, she was dead. I sat in that storage unit until the sun went down, listening to every file. Mom had been thorough, more thorough than I'd ever imagined. She'd traced Ashley's real identity through multiple name changes. She'd contacted families of previous victims. She'd even found Marcus's real name and address. Ashley's real name was Eleanor Hayes. She'd legally changed her identity 4 times over 2 decades, each change coinciding with a new location and a new wealthy target. But Mom had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how quickly Ashley would act once she realized the investigation was closing in. The final recording was Mom's voice, shaky and terrified, clearly recorded on her phone while hiding somewhere. "I found the brake fluid under our car tonight. Ashley knows I've been investigating her. David won't listen. She's convinced him I'm having some kind of breakdown. If something happens to me, please know it wasn't an accident. The evidence is hidden where we used to read together. Protect my daughter. She's going to come for her next." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the recorder. Mom had known she was going to die. She'd known Ashley was planning to kill her, and she'd tried to leave evidence behind. But where was this evidence she'd mentioned? The place where we used to read together. I knew exactly where she meant. In our old house before Dad sold it after the wedding, there was a window seat in my bedroom where Mom would read me stories every night. She'd built a secret compartment underneath when I was 6, where I used to hide my diary and special treasures. The current homeowners were an elderly couple named the Millers. I'd met them briefly when they bought the house. They seemed kind, and they'd known about the tragedy. Maybe they'd let me check the old hiding spot. I called them that evening, explaining that I'd left something important in my old room and asking if I could possibly retrieve it. Mrs. Miller was incredibly gracious. "Of course, dear. We read about your mother's accident in the local paper. Such a tragedy. Come by any time." The next day, I drove to my childhood home for the first time in 5 years. The Millers had redecorated completely, but my old room was recognizable. The window seat was still there, though they'd added new cushions. Mrs. Miller watched curiously as I examined the seat. "Is there a problem with the window?" she asked. "My mom built a small storage compartment under here," I explained. "I'm hoping she left something for me." It took me 10 minutes to find the hidden latch, but when I did, the compartment opened just like it used to. Inside, wrapped in waterproof plastic, was everything Mom had died trying to preserve. Flash drives, printed emails, photographs, bank records, legal documents, a complete dossier on Eleanor Hayes' criminal history spanning 2 decades. Mom hadn't just been investigating Ashley's plan to kill her. She'd been building a case that would have exposed her as a serial killer. There were detailed files on each of Ashley's previous victims, including autopsy reports that raised red flags. Arthur's heart attack had occurred right after he'd consumed a meal containing digitalis, a heart medication that's lethal in large doses. Edward's accidental fall down basement stairs had happened after he'd been drugged with sleeping pills that weren't prescribed to him. Thomas's accidental medication interaction involved a blood thinner that had been deliberately introduced to his system. Each death had been carefully orchestrated to look natural or accidental, and each had occurred within months of the victim changing their will or life insurance to benefit their new girlfriend. But Mom had found the pattern. She'd contacted other family members, hired a private investigator, and even tracked down Marcus, whose real name was Marcus Caruso, an auto mechanic with a criminal record who specialized in automotive accidents. The most damning evidence was a series of emails between Eleanor and Marcus discussing not just Mom's murder, but their plans for my eventual elimination. The daughter will inherit everything when she turns 21, Eleanor had written. But kids are easier to handle than wives. A few years of undermining her credibility, some carefully documented episodes, and I can have her declared mentally incompetent. Then I control the trust fund until she's 25. Plenty of time to drain the accounts. She'd been planning to destroy me financially and psychologically, just like she'd planned to kill Mom. But there was more. Marcus had kept copies of everything, apparently, as insurance against Eleanor double-crossing him. Mom had somehow obtained his files, which included evidence of other murders they'd committed together across multiple states. I realized I was holding evidence that could put both of them away for life if Marcus was still alive. According to the final document in Mom's file, Marcus Caruso had died in a motorcycle accident 6 months after Mom's death. The timing seemed remarkably convenient, especially considering the detailed description of how Eleanor had killed previous partners who knew too much. I spent the rest of the day organizing everything chronologically. Mom had been incredibly thorough, but she'd hidden the evidence so well that it had taken 7 years for anyone to find it. 7 years during which Ashley had played the perfect stepmother while planning my destruction. I needed to be careful. If she'd killed 5 people, including her own partner, I was clearly in danger. But I also knew time was running out. Ashley had been getting more aggressive lately about my supposed mental health issues, suggesting to Dad that I needed professional intervention before starting college. Looking at her timeline, I had maybe 6 months before she'd have convinced Dad to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. Once she had power of attorney, she could drain my accounts and keep me institutionalized indefinitely. But Mom had given me the weapons I needed to fight back. I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in cold cases, showing him just enough evidence to confirm that the recordings were admissible and the documentation compelling. "This is extraordinary," he said, studying the files. "Your mother built a prosecutor's dream case, but you need to be extremely careful. If this woman has killed 5 people, you're in immediate danger." I already knew that. Ashley had been getting more brazen about her criticism of my mental state, even in front of Dad. Just last week, she'd suggested I was showing signs of the same paranoid delusions that affected your mother toward the end. The irony was suffocating. Mom hadn't been paranoid or delusional. She'd been documenting the truth about a serial killer who was planning to murder her. And now that same killer was trying to gaslight me into believing I was mentally ill. But I had one advantage Ashley didn't know about. Her 45th birthday party was coming up in 2 weeks. She'd invited everyone who mattered in our social circle. Dad's business associates, our neighbors, her book club, extended family. She loved being the center of attention, playing the devoted wife and stepmother who'd saved our broken family. It would be the perfect opportunity to expose her in front of everyone who'd believed her lies. I volunteered to handle the audio setup for the party. How thoughtful, she beamed when I offered. "You're finally learning to be supportive instead of sullen and difficult." If she only knew what I was really planning. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing meticulously. I organized the evidence into a digital presentation that would tell the complete story chronologically. I researched the legal implications and made sure I had copies of everything stored in multiple secure locations. I also researched the statute of limitations for murder in our state. There wasn't one. Most importantly, I identified who would be at the party. Detective Miller, Dad's golf partner, would be there. Uncle Frank, who'd already noticed inconsistencies in Ashley's story, Miss Jenkins from next door, who worked as a paralegal. several other people with legal or law enforcement backgrounds who could serve as witnesses. The party was held in our backyard, decorated with white lights and elegant table settings. Ashley had hired caterers and even a string quartet. She wore a flowing blue dress and held court among the guests, recounting stories of how she'd saved our family and raised me despite my challenging nature. "She's been difficult," she confided to Ms. Jenkins while I was within earshot. "Inherited her mother's emotional instability. Thank goodness I was able to provide the stability and guidance her real mother never could." Dad beamed at her adoringly. "I don't know what we'd have done without Ashley. She turned our lives around when we needed it most." Uncle Frank raised his glass to Ashley, who proved that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose. The words made me sick, but I smiled and nodded along with everyone else. As the evening progressed, I listened to guest after guest praise Ashley for her devotion to our family. They talked about her sacrifice in taking on a troubled stepdaughter. They admired her patience with my inherited mental health challenges. Every word was a knife in my back, but also fuel for what I was about to do. After dinner and the traditional birthday toasts, I stood up with my champagne glass. "I want to share something special tonight," I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the yard. "A recording I found recently that really shows who Ashley is." She smiled expectantly, clearly assuming I was about to praise her publicly. Dad looked proud, thinking I was finally acknowledging Ashley's role in our family. Several guests murmured approvingly, expecting a heartfelt tribute from the stepdaughter to the woman who'd raised her. I walked to the sound system and connected my phone. This first recording is from 7 years ago when Ashley was planning our family's future. I pressed play. Her voice filled the backyard crystal clear through the speakers. "She drives that route every Tuesday. Same time, same speed. If the brakes fail at Eagle Pass Bend, it'll look completely accidental." The effect was immediate and devastating. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Every eye in the yard turned to Ashley, whose face had gone completely white. Marcus's voice joined in, discussing insurance money and murder timelines as casually as they might discuss the weather. "Stop this," Ashley hissed, lunging toward the speakers. Dad caught her arm, his face a mask of confusion and growing horror. "What is this?" "Let me explain," I said calmly, advancing to the next file. The second recording was even more damning. Ashley's voice bragging about tracking Mom's routine, researching the perfect murder method, calculating exactly when and where the brake failure would be most lethal. Several guests gasped. Ms. Jenkins covered her mouth in shock. The string quartet had stopped playing, their instruments forgotten as they stared in disbelief. "This is fake," Ashley screamed, her composure completely shattered. "She's mentally unstable, just like her mother was. She's having a psychotic break, creating elaborate fantasies." But I wasn't finished. Not even close. The third recording was Mom confronting Ashley at the Daily Grind Cafe. The cold, emotionless way Ashley described her previous victims. The casual admission that she'd killed before and would kill again. "Arthur in Scottsdale, Arizona," I announced to the stunned crowd. "Heart attack right after changing his will." "Edward in Boulder, Colorado, who fell down basement stairs." "Thomas in Portland, Oregon, whose medication mysteriously interacted with alcohol he never drank." Dad staggered backward like he'd been physically slapped. "You told me those were just coincidences. Bad luck in your past relationships." "They were practice," I said, playing another recording where Ashley described refining her methods with each murder. Detective Miller was already on his phone, but I had more evidence to present. I played the recording of Ashley discussing my planned institutionalization, her timeline for gaining control of my inheritance, her detailed plans for my psychological destruction. "She's been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent," I announced, just like she convinced Dad that Mom was losing her mind before she murdered her. Uncle Frank was studying the printed documents I'd started distributing these bank records. "Eleanor, your real name is Eleanor Hayes. You've been using false identities." "Her real name," I confirmed, "is Eleanor Hayes. She's changed her legal identity 4 times in 20 years. Each change coincided with the death of a wealthy man who'd recently made her his beneficiary." The yard was in chaos now. Some guests were calling police. Others were recording everything on their phones. A few were quietly leaving, unable to process what they were witnessing. Detective Miller approached Ashley, who was backing toward the garden gate. "Eleanor Hayes, I need you to come with me for questioning regarding multiple homicides. My name is Ashley, she insisted desperately. This is all fabricated by a disturbed teenager who needs psychiatric help. You all know she's been unstable for years. That's when I played the most devastating recording of all. Mom's final message recorded on her phone while hiding in terror. I found the brake fluid under our car tonight. Ashley knows I've been investigating her. If something happens to me, please know it wasn't an accident. The evidence is hidden where we used to read together. Protect my daughter. She's coming for her next. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the night sounds seemed to have stopped. When Mom's voice faded away, Dad was crying. Several guests were openly weeping. Others looked physically sick. Ashley tried to run. She made it halfway to the garden gate before two off-duty officers from the party tackled her to the ground. As they forced her hands behind her back, she turned to look at me with pure, undiluted hatred. "You ungrateful little bitch," she snarled, all pretense of motherly concern gone. "I gave you everything. I saved your pathetic father from his depression. I made you into someone worthwhile instead of the damaged freak you were destined to become." "No," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You killed my mother and spent 7 years trying to erase her memory. You manipulated my father and planned to destroy me, too. But you failed." As they loaded her into the police car, she screamed at the crowd of witnesses. "She's lying. Check her medical records. Mental illness runs in that family." I was trying to get her help. Even in handcuffs, she was still trying to gaslight everyone who'd heard the evidence. Detective Miller looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow with all the evidence. Are you safe tonight?" "I've already made copies of everything," I assured him. "Multiple copies stored in different locations. Everything's organized chronologically with timestamps and authenticity verification." The investigation that followed moved faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours, they'd reopened cases in Scottsdale, Arizona, Boulder, Colorado, and Portland, Oregon. Marcus's motorcycle accident was reclassified as a homicide. The FBI joined the investigation when they realized they were dealing with a serial killer who'd operated across state lines for 2 decades. But the most shocking discovery came when they searched Eleanor's belongings with a warrant. Hidden in a safety deposit box under her original name, they found what could only be described as trophies, wedding rings from each husband, watches, personal items that meant nothing to her, but everything to the families she'd destroyed. There was also a leather-bound journal documenting her methods, her target selection process, and her psychological manipulation techniques. She'd written about me extensively, describing me as an obstacle to be removed once the initial mourning period ends, and David is fully dependent. According to her timeline, I would have been institutionalized within 8 months of my 18th birthday. The journal also revealed the existence of other victims the authorities hadn't discovered yet. 2 more men in Nevada, another in Washington, possibly others she hadn't bothered to document. Dad was completely shattered when detectives showed him the journal entries. The guilt of betraying Mom's memory, of allowing her killer to raise her daughter, of nearly losing me, too. It destroyed him. She was so convincing, he kept saying during our long conversations in the weeks that followed. "She seemed to genuinely love you. I thought I was giving you the stable family life your mother would have wanted." "She's a psychopath," I explained gently. "They're experts at mimicking emotions they don't actually feel. None of this was your fault." But Dad blamed himself completely. He'd trusted his wife's killer to raise her daughter. He'd allowed that same killer to slowly poison him against Mom's memory. He'd been prepared to have his own daughter committed based on the lies of a serial murderer. The preliminary hearing was a media circus. For different jurisdictions, wanted to prosecute Eleanor for murder. The FBI had opened a task force to investigate whether there were additional victims spanning 3 decades. Eleanor's defense team tried every angle they could think of. They claimed the recordings were fabricated using advanced audio technology. They argued that I'd had a complete psychotic break and created an elaborate delusion about my stepmother. They even suggested that Mom had killed herself and somehow framed Eleanor posthumously. Nothing worked. The evidence was overwhelming. Forensic analysis confirmed that every recording was authentic, recorded on devices that predated modern audio manipulation technology. The brake lines on Mom's car had indeed been tampered with, exactly as described in the recordings. Marcus's motorcycle showed similar patterns of mechanical sabotage. Most damning was Eleanor's own journal written in her handwriting over a period of years containing details only the killer could know. The trial lasted 10 weeks. I testified for 3 full days, walking the jury through each piece of evidence Mom had gathered and explaining how Eleanor had manipulated our family for 7 years. The most difficult part was describing the psychological abuse. How she'd gradually convinced Dad and me that Mom was mentally unstable. How she'd systematically undermined my confidence and academic achievements. How she'd been preparing to have me institutionalized. She didn't just kill my mother. I told the jury during my testimony. She tried to kill my mother's memory. She spent years convincing us that Mom was flawed, paranoid, inadequate. She made us doubt our own memories and feelings. Eleanor's defense team tried to paint me as an unreliable witness, pointing to my age when Mom died and suggesting I'd been influenced by recovered memory syndrome, but the physical evidence supported every detail of my testimony. The prosecution countered with testimony from Eleanor's previous victims' families, who described identical patterns of manipulation and suspicious deaths. Arthur's daughter testified about how Eleanor had isolated her father from his family, convinced him to change his will, then nursed him through a sudden illness that killed him within weeks. Edward's ex-wife described how Eleanor had systematically turned Edward against his children, then convinced him to remove them from his inheritance. When she tried to warn Edward about Eleanor's suspicious background, he'd accused her of jealousy and cut off contact. 3 months later, he was dead. Thomas's brother testified about the strange circumstances surrounding Thomas's death, how he'd supposedly started drinking heavily despite being a lifelong teetotaler, how his medication had been mysteriously altered, how Eleanor had been the only one present when he died. The most powerful moment of the trial came when they played Mom's final recording for the jury. Her voice full of love and terror, begging someone to protect her daughter if anything happened to her. Several jurors were crying by the end. Eleanor stared straight ahead, showing no emotion whatsoever. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood and delivered guilty verdicts on all counts. For counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, witness intimidation, and identity theft. Eleanor showed no reaction as each verdict was read. She sat perfectly still as if she were watching someone else's trial. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following week. Eleanor was remanded to custody without bail, ending her 7-year charade as a grieving stepmother and devoted wife. During the sentencing hearing, several family members of her victims gave impact statements. Arthur's daughter described growing up without a father, never understanding why he'd suddenly turned against his family. Edward's son talked about the guilt of not being able to protect his father from a woman they'd all instinctively distrusted. When it was my turn to speak, I prepared carefully. Your Honor, Eleanor Hayes didn't just kill my mother. She tried to kill my mother's memory. She spent 7 years convincing my father and me that Mom was flawed, unstable, inadequate. She made us doubt our own memories and feelings about the woman who'd loved us most. I pulled out the photo of Mom and me for my 7th birthday, both of us laughing at something off camera. This is who my mother really was, not the distorted version Eleanor created, but a woman who loved fiercely and fought courageously, even when she knew it might cost her life. Eleanor may have ended her life, but she couldn't destroy her legacy. I looked directly at Eleanor, who was staring at me with cold, emotionless eyes. Every day I live free and happy is proof that love is stronger than evil. Every achievement I make, every relationship I build, every moment of joy I experience is a testament to my mother's love and sacrifice. Eleanor was allowed to make a statement before sentencing. She stood slowly, looked directly at me, and said, "You destroyed my life over jealousy and mental illness. Your mother was paranoid and unstable, and you inherited that same dysfunction. I tried to help you become a functional human being, but you're beyond saving. You'll end up just like her, alone, crazy, and ultimately self-destructive." Even facing life in prison, she was still trying to gaslight me. The judge had heard enough. "Ms. Hayes, you have shown no remorse for taking 4 lives and destroying countless others. You spent decades preying on vulnerable people, manipulating their grief and trust for financial gain. You destroyed families, orphaned children, and caused immeasurable suffering." He paused, looking directly at her. "You were convicted by overwhelming evidence. including your own documented admissions of guilt. This young woman didn't destroy your life. She prevented you from destroying more lives. She showed remarkable courage in seeking justice for her mother and protecting future victims. The sentence was life without the possibility of parole on each murder count, to be served consecutively. Eleanor would spend the rest of her life in a 6-by-8 cell with no hope of ever being free again. As the bailiff led her away, she turned back one final time. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been genuine emotion. Not remorse or sadness, but rage. Pure undiluted fury that her perfect plan had been destroyed by the daughter of one of her victims. Then she was gone, and I was finally free. The aftermath of the trial was both liberating and overwhelming. Media attention was intense. The story of a serial killer stepmother exposed by her victim's daughter captured national headlines. I did a few interviews, mainly to honor Mom's memory and encourage other families to trust their instincts about suspicious relationships, but mostly I focused on healing and moving forward. 3 years later, I'm a senior at University of California, Berkeley, majoring in forensic psychology with a minor in criminal justice. I'm writing my thesis on psychological manipulation in domestic settings using my own experience as a case study. I volunteer with families of murder victims, helping them navigate the legal system and cope with their loss. I've spoken at law enforcement conferences about recognizing signs of financial predators who target grieving spouses. Dad and I have rebuilt our relationship completely. The guilt nearly destroyed him initially, but therapy helped him understand that he'd been manipulated by an expert. He sold the house where Eleanor had lived and bought a smaller place closer to campus. We have dinner every Sunday, sharing real memories of Mom without Eleanor's poisonous interpretations. He's been dating again recently. A kind librarian named Sarah who knew Mom from the Pasadena City College where they both volunteered. Sarah doesn't try to replace Mom or compete with her memory. She simply adds her own warmth and humor to our family dinners. I keep Mom's voice recorder on my desk at school along with her photo and the letter she'd written me for my 16th birthday that Dad found in her things years later. My beautiful daughter, it read. By the time you read this, you'll be becoming the incredible woman I always knew you'd be. Remember that you are capable of anything. Trust your instincts, especially when something feels wrong. Stand up for truth, even when it's difficult or people don't want to hear it. And know that no matter what happens, my love for you is eternal and unbreakable. The FBI investigation eventually connected Eleanor to 8 additional suspicious deaths across 4 decades. Families who'd lost loved ones under mysterious circumstances finally got answers. Children who'd grown up believing their parent died accidentally learned the truth about what really happened. One of those children was a woman named Megan, whose father had died in what was ruled a hiking accident 20 years ago. She'd been 12 at the time and her father's girlfriend, who went by the name Bethany, then had consoled the family and inherited everything. Megan contacted me after seeing news coverage of the trial. She'd spent years feeling guilty for disliking Bethany, thinking she was being unfair to a woman who was trying to help their family. I knew something was wrong, she told me over coffee. But I was just a kid. Adults kept telling me I should be grateful Bethany was taking care of us. We've become close friends, bonded by the shared experience of surviving Eleanor's manipulation. Megan has helped identify 2 more victims from Eleanor's early years, bringing closure to families who'd been wondering about suspicious deaths for decades. Eleanor herself has never admitted guilt or shown any remorse. She filed multiple appeals, all of which were denied. She sent me several letters from prison, alternating between claims of innocence and vague threats about what will happen when she gets out. She'll never get out. But even knowing that, I still check the locks on my apartment door twice before bed. Last year, I received a letter that was different from the others. Eleanor had supposedly found religion and wanted to apologize. She hoped I'd visit so she could explain her side of the story and help me find closure. The letter was full of psychological manipulation techniques I recognized from my studies. She was still trying to gaslight me, still attempting to convince me that my perception of events was flawed. I wrote back with just one line. My mother would be proud of who I've become. That's all the closure I need. Sometimes justice takes 7 years. Sometimes it takes a daughter who refuses to let her mother's murder go unpunished. Sometimes it takes the courage to believe that truth is worth fighting for, even when the whole world has been convinced of a lie. Mom's voice recordings, preserved in a storage unit for 7 years, became the key that locked away a serial killer forever. Her investigation, incomplete at the time of her death, provided enough evidence to convict her murderer and identify multiple other victims. In the end, Mom got her justice. And I got something even more valuable: the truth about who she really was. Every graduation photo in our house now includes Mom's picture. Dad keeps her voice recorder on the mantle as a reminder that the truth has power even after death. We light a candle for her every Tuesday, not in mourning, but in celebration of her courage and love. Ashley Eleanor Hayes will spend the rest of her life in a cell forgotten by everyone except the families she destroyed. Mom's legacy lives on in every life I touch through my advocacy work. Every victim family I help navigate the legal system. Every student I teach about recognizing manipulation and abuse. She'd have been right about one thing. I did inherit something powerful from my mother. Not the scattered focus or mental instability she'd invented, but Mom's determination to protect the people she loved. Her commitment to truth and her unshakable belief that justice is worth fighting for. Even from beyond the grave, Mom found a way to save me. And that's exactly what real mothers do. They protect their children no matter what.